Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper. I'm the co-author of Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, How to Think Like a Professional DFS Player. You can get the 15-hour audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com. If you this is the core work that we talk about on this podcast every week when we go over the application or thought process. And it's an evergreen guide. This you could listen to this 5 years from now, and it still applies to any sport, any site. It is the game theory of DFS. If you want to get better, if you want to play like the top players, you got to learn the game theory. It's not necessarily about the sport, and that's kind of what we talk about week to week here. Now we're in NFL season. I'm assuming we'll go into NBA or MLB once that comes in, and the concepts apply the same ways. And I'm joined as always with the since I play the more of the lower stakes, most massively multi-entity type of stuff, as well as cash games. Eric tries his hand at the higher stakes, single entry, three max types of contests. Erik Beimfohr, we're both at Roto Grinders, but you can find us on Twitter. We're always needling people and making jokes. I'm assuming I want to talk a little bit about cash because people do play cash games, but I'm assuming that on a week like this where the chalk smashes, that you probably didn't do well.
That would be correct.
Okay, well, me neither. So in GPP, me neither.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Cash games, I did. I made like $5,000. So I'm happy because my cash game, won like 95% of my head to heads. But on weeks like these, they don't happen. That confirmation bias is like, oh, the chalk hits or whatever. The chalk doesn't hit. Not all of it hits all at once, many times. So if you're thinking about playing DFS, like even just for NFL for a 17 games season, like this is the week that if you're a sharp DFS GPP player, that you just take a bath on, right? It's just there's no process that you would have been like, oh, let me just jam in all the chalk and just Jeff Wilson and I win. I mean, like there was no way that you were gonna get to the lineups that won, right?
No chance. That's I'm sure you watch and some other people watch Peter Overzet's lineup builder, but he does his review on Mondays, and he pulled up he did a good job pulling up the winning lineups, and he's honest. He's like, I would never play this team in a tournament. It's like, there was basically two pieces that were not the stone chalk. It was basically a cash team with very small pivots, which some people, I don't really agree, but some people will say oh yeah, you can do that in, single entry, smaller field stuff. And I don't actually agree with that, but I understand where they're coming from.
But the pivots, when you say pivots, I know I interrupt you a lot. That's just what it is. People comment. It's like I always want to clarify things.
Yeah.
The small pivots are not small pivots to another somewhat lower owned player. The pivots had to be to Jeff Wilson, had to be to the 2% owned guy that out of the blue comes up with a 30-point score. So yeah, that's what I always say about cumulative ownership. What's the number that it has to be? Well, it could be a really high number, but you need the really low number with the barbell of your salary. Yeah, you're jamming all the chalk, pivot in two spots with 1% owned players. Your cumulative ownership number is going to be high, but it's going to be a leveraged enough lineup to win. But you're more likely to have chalk fail at least a piece or two where the cumulative ownership will end up being somewhere lower because you're fading a 30% owned guy that only put up 8 points.
Right. And for me, you talked about MME versus, three max type stuff that I play. It's just not feasible. I'm scratching off lottery tickets if I jam in 6 chalk pieces and then try to play Jeff Wilson Jr. I'm just not going to win long-term playing that way for me personally. If you're playing, like you said, if you're playing, 150 teams in different contests, there's times where that is applicable. But for me personally, I'm just not going to win when that is the way, when that is the path to winning. Some of these, even winning the SPY, it was the week where I think Pete talked about it again too. It was the week where the blitz optimal like won tournaments. That's basically what this week was. The SPY was like literally like the 6 chalkiest players, and then like a pivot to Justin Herbert and a pivot to I don't know whoever, Todd Gurley, I think it was. It's like, yeah, okay, Todd Gurley was 6% owned and Herbert was 6% owned, but then then you had it was a cash team aside from that, which is just like, that's, you just take, like you said, you just take a bath on those weeks. I think it was a really hard week for contrarian tournament players because there were, to me, some clear paths away from that chalk that made for strong tournament plays, but the chalk was just, I mean, we haven't had the weeks of the 4K running backs that are like really tough to bust. Like it's real, outside of an injury and like really extreme variance, it's really tough to bust Jamal Williams. It was even really tough to bust Giovanni Bernard, and he almost did bust. But he did, but when you just have $4,000 running backs who catch passes and are on the field 90% of the time, it's just hard to bust those guys. And, then you get, Devontae Adams having his ceiling game, whatever. It was definitely just a little bit tougher week to bust the chalk. And then the pivots, just didn't really.
Well, the pivots got really as many points as the chalk. So like you didn't gain anything. Like, yeah, Todd Gurley was contrarian, but he got 22. Like all the running backs got 20. Like if you had a running back that had 20 points, you either got it from the cheap running backs or you overpaid 2K for it, but you still got 20 points in your running back slot. So like whether or not you played, if I played Antonio Gibson over Gio Bernard, didn't matter. They both got about the same points, right? Like you're not gaining points that other players don't have. And this is why, and I tweeted about this, that in a long-term way, as a GPP player, I love weeks like this.
Yeah.
As a because what's going to happen? Because I look at like Reddit, you get the two sides. This is what you see in the community, the more broader community. I spy on Reddit. I lurk on Reddit. I lurk in some Facebook groups. I don't participate because it's a lot of bullshit. It's a lot of conspiracy theories, and it's no one's having real conversations. It's do you think this guy is going to do good type of crap, and I'm just not going to bother with that. That either you had the sentiment of like I can't believe I scored 200 points, it didn't cash, right? Because they don't understand that what relative value is, not absolute value. And then you have the opposite of it, which I like the most. The ones that are complaining that they don't understand that, who cares that you got 200 points? So you didn't get 202. You needed that this week, so it doesn't matter. I like the other side of the people patting themselves on the back, right?
Oh yeah,
right. The people patting themselves on the back. Now, I'm not talking about like industry people. I'm talking about players. Just Joe Schmo players that are like, I picked the players right. I got 220 points, and they got like a 3 or 4x in a GPP. Right? Because you needed way more than that to win. You needed what, like almost 280 to win, and the cash lines were so high that if you scored like let's just take even just cash games, if you scored 204 points, you won double ups by about 4 points. That's the same as if the cash line was 150 and you scored 154. Right? So like if this week, if you put up 260 this past week, I consider I think like I think you played well because you had to find points that other people didn't have. And it was very easy to find 200 points. Like that, you didn't do anything special by doing it. You played the best plays. Okay, great. And so many other players played the best plays. How did you find points that other people didn't get? And it was very easy to get to a 220-ish type of score, even with slight pivots. I mean, my cash lineup was 216. So, I mean, like, and that's a lineup that I built it literally in 2 minutes. And then, like that of the best play. Like, what's the construction of the best plays? And it's a 2v2, 3v2. It's like there's not many players that could fit in. And that scored a 216. So if you scored a 220, how much better than you? I mean, you didn't do anything remarkably different than anyone else. So you have to compare it to the cash lines, the winning score lines, not like I did the best at picking the right players. No, you need to do the best at picking the players that other people are not picking that do better than the best players. because anyone can pick the best plays. So in cash games, I just wanted to highlight just a concept because we talk about this in the book, and a lot of the book, the audio course, is broad based. Here are the concepts. Here are a couple of examples of how you could apply it, and think. And these are the things you have to think about when you're building, depending on the contest, depending on the format, depending on the sport, depending on everything. But the application, it takes a while to get experience in the application. That's why I used to play poker, then read a book, then play poker, then read a book, then play and go back and forth, and you get better at applying it. But in cash games, essentially my number one lineup and my number two lineup, like that I was deciding between, were the two most popular lineups. Basically, the lineup that I played that ended up being the blitz optimal, like I made it and then I ran the blitz optimal, and it happened to be the same exact lineup. Was basically the 3v3 of Watson, Keenan Allen, and Jared Cook versus Kyler Murray, Traquan Smith, and Travis Kelce. So I was deciding between the two of them. I also thought that Robbie Anderson was close enough to Keenan Allen. It depends on the projections that you looked at. I mean, they were both up there. So, I mean, like, I'm not saying anything that's, like, crazy. But I'm like, I think I overestimated how many people were not going to play. I underestimated, or whatever, Keenan Allen ownership. I thought he would be much higher owned, in GPPs especially. So, like, I had to think in terms of, who do I have to block? Because I thought Kamara and Jamal Williams and Devontae Adams and McLaurin were like they were locked. There's and the Washington, and I'll get to the Washington defense. Okay, so that's part of the concept. Blocking means that they have so much upside and so much ownership that, and they're the best plays. Like I'm not moving it. I could see the construction with Kareem Hunt without Gio Bernard. I saw it. I'm gonna side with the running back value every single time. Most of the time I am. Traquan Smith, I didn't think it was a necessity. I thought there was too many good wide receivers. That why am I taking that spot there where the like tight end was more of a wasteland. It's like, can I fade? How I had to think to myself, how owned is Kelce going to be? Do I need to block the tight end? And I came to the conclusion that he wasn't going to be owned enough that I needed to block Kelce. But then when it came down to Robbie Anderson, I could have made a build instead of Keenan Allen with Robbie Anderson. And then I could have done Robbie Anderson and the Browns defense. Okay? Based on my projections, that had a slightly higher median. The Browns were actually projected median a little higher than the Washington team. And Robbie Anderson was like, 0.2 or something. Something like that. And Robbie Anderson was correlated with Alvin Kamara and Jared Cook in my lineup.
Yep.
Okay. Now in GPP, you would think, Robbie Anderson's correlated. I should be playing Robbie Anderson. But the thing is, a GPP correlation increases your variance because all the players are correlated to each other. So if one does well, the other does well, most likely. But also, it happens in the reverse as well. If one does bad, the others do bad. So in GPPs where you're looking to increase your variance in your lineup, you want to take on the correlation. Cash games where I don't get paid more for finishing over the cash line than anyone else. So I want to, if given the chance, I want to lower the variance in my lineup. I'd rather take on negative correlation sometimes by playing, you could play the running back and the quarterback together from the same team, even though they may be negatively correlated. So it's like, well, if they happen to run the ball more this game, at least I get those points also. So it doesn't matter what happens in the game. You wouldn't do that in GPPs. So when I had to choose between, and I was thinking for a little bit, I probably wouldn't have ended up doing it anyway, but it came down to the decision, do I play Robbie Anderson in the Browns defense? I know the Washington defense is mega owned. I know by far. And the defense is the most variant position in all of NFL DFS. Who knows who's going to score the most points at defense from week to week? And I know they're going to be, especially in high stakes. I mean, they ended up coming in at like 70% ownership. So it's like, Yeah, this is going to be the week that the Washington puts up 17, the Browns put up 8, and I lose all my cash games on a goddamn defense.
Yeah,
Do I want to have my slate decided by defense? No. So I'm like,
no,
I'm going to side towards Washington. And then Robbie Anderson and Keenan Allen. I know Allen's going to be owned. Robbie Anderson ended up like 6% owned in double ups. Allen ended up like 30% owned in double ups. And even though Anderson was correlated, I wanted to lower the variance in my lineup. So even if I thought, let's say you're sitting at home right now and you had that thought, who should I play, Robbie Anderson or Keenan Allen in my double ups? And you have a conviction that Robbie Anderson's going to do well today. The right move is Keenan Allen. I mean, the right move is to take the non-positive correlation and play the chalk defense, because if you believe that construction is optimal in general, and it's just a flip on a similar price range wide receiver, just side with the one, especially if you're playing low stakes. Let them make them. If you're playing triple ups, if you're playing three mans, absolutely. If you're playing three mans, and you want to play Robbie Anderson and Browns defense and increase your variance just by a little, because you know you're going to be overlapped in probably the other 6 slots.
yep,
Like, you're now playing against 2 opponents that are most likely duped or close, or much more. They don't have those. They have the other side of the 2v2, where they have the Kelsey lineup with Kyler Murray type of
hmm
lineup. But now when you win when you are on the right side of that thing, you win 3 times your money, not 2 times your money. So you're willing to take on that. If you're playing a
yep,
5-man, a 3-man, kind of the cash games, but they're not really cash. They're like slightly, the 5X's, the Kints, those types of things. But that's what the decision making. That's what I was doing at noon. Going, do I do this? Do I do that? And it's quite possible I didn't, because I wasn't playing enough 3-mans and triple ups, that I would have literally split and said,
hmm
I'm going to play Keenan Allen and the Washington defense in all of my double ups and head to heads. And then in all of my 3-mans and triple ups, I just literally move all, I edit entries, I just export that lineup there, and I'm going to play the 2v2. I would have obviously lost
right,
doing that in those contests. But if I wanted to, that would have been the lineup that fits. We talk about it all the time. The lineup that fits the contest. Just so happens the lineup that fit the double ups also did well in triple ups. So it didn't really. When I have the 216 lineup and everyone else has the 208 lineup, then some people have the 198 lineup. That was a build with Kareem Hunt like that. Like then you get on you get on the right side. But I mean, obviously, Eric, this is not. I mean, like you're in single entry and 3 max. You're thinking more of like what I would just describe to do in the 3-mans and the triple
yeah,
ups, that you want to increase. You want to still have a chalky enough lineup, possibly, but the whole purpose of positive correlation is to increase the variance in your lineup.
yeah. And I do think your point. That's what I was going to kind of bring up. It was a really perfect example of a week where 3-mans, 5-mans, like you said, triple ups, quintuple ups, whatever, all those contests, right? 3-mans are like my favorite example of it, where there's very, very clear. Now, like you said, it would have lost. So, you come on here and somebody's like, this strategy's shit because I lost. But it's a really good week in 3-mans and 5-mans. There's probably a ton of 3-mans and 5-mans. I don't play that many of them, so I don't have like an example to pull up. But if you're in 3-mans and you're against whoever, right, Empire Maker and whoever, some of the best cash players out there, you knew their lineup, or you knew one of their 2 or 3. Like you said, there was basically those 3 options, and that's what you saw every single one of the high stakes guys play. So if you're in 3-mans against them, you're hoping that they land on whatever, like they both played that 208 lineup, the Kelsey lineup. Then you just play a 2v2 or a 3v3 from that. And like you said, you're taking on a little more variance and a little lower projection for now you're 3xing your money when you win. Like that's the dream. Like that's the dream scenario. It's the perfect example of why you should play that contest just slightly different than you should play, your head-to-heads and double ups. You could even argue on a week like this, depending on how much risk you like to take on head-to-heads. A lot of people just play the same, right, head-to-head and double up lineup, but at different levels of head-to-heads, you might be thinking a little bit differently. You know, if you're playing 1K head-to-heads versus your $5, or if you can play the $1, $2, $3, that's a very different game. Like the Levitan says that I know better or prove it to me in the $1 head-to-heads, but in the 1K head-to-heads, I know what their lineup is. So what do I want to do? And now that there's all that strategy around that, and I think it was a really good example this week of that kind of thing. Like it was so evident.
But the thing is that we're missing the first step. Like we're explaining the strategy, but we're missing the first step, which is where we're not going to get into the first step. The first step is you got to be good enough to know what those cash lineups are. I mean, like if you didn't understand why one of those three lineups or something close, if you were not on Sunday morning deciding between those types of 2v2s of do I play Traquan, do I play Deontay Johnson because the $200 made it weird, so you couldn't really get in. Are you playing? Are you going down to Herbert even or Burrow and then making like that was off the beaten path, but still viable. There was a was a Lockett lineup, Lockett and Adams that you could have played that obviously crushed. But those are if you weren't on that, if you were sitting there and if you're sitting there, if you played Kamara, Hunt, and Bernard with no Jamal Williams, like you screwed up. If you played Kamara, Hunt, Davis, if you paid up at running back at all three spots, you screwed up. Even if you did, because you could have done that and still found your way to Lockett, Adams, and then Deontay Johnson, and a cheap defense that wouldn't have mattered because you got 51-47 in your wide receiver slots, and you take on the 8 points that Davis had. Like if you. What's the expression? Like you could break the rules once you know the rules.
Yes.
Right? So you have to first know the rules. And even if you subscribe to a site that has decent projections, you could have gotten to any of those lineups. I mean, I built it by hand just because skillful players are good at identifying value and identifying optimal lineup constructions. But you could feel free to go to pretty much any decent projections this past week and go, give me the top 10 optimals. Give me the top 20. And you would have found one of those three lineups in the top 20 of like any projection set that you could possibly, reasonable. Obviously, if it's a horrible one, you're not. But once you get that, then you could apply the strat. Then you could say, do I play this or do I play that? So my Robbie Anderson Browns example was in the top 10 of the optimals that I ran. And I was already, this is before I was hand building. So it's not like I looked at the 10 and then chose, although you could do that too. I hand built and said, I could do this, let me run. And that's when I found out the one that I had was the Blitz Optimal. And then I'm like, okay. And then once I know I have the Blitz Optimal, it's like, well, my low stakes, because a lot of Blitz subscribers are more lower stakes players than high stakes players. I'm like, okay, I'm going to see this lineup in my $5 double ups. So now I know that these players are going to be more, this construction is going to be more owned. So if I wanted to, I could have split even more, Eric. I could have played my Anderson lineups in the triple ups, right, in the three mans. You're nodding. You know what I'm talking about. And then split out my double ups and head to heads and said, all of my $10 and $5 stuff, I'm going with the Blitz Optimal. I'm going with that. And then in my high stakes, I'm going with the Kelsey lineup. Right, I'm going with the lineup that ended up at 208 because I believe that maybe the higher stakes players are more likely to play that. Right, so I'm blocking Kelsey here. I'm blocking the other guy, Keenan Allen there. Right, I mean this is all about mitigating like risks. This is all based on how do I lower my variance and still eke out a profitable return in cash games. And I know, and that's why I wanted to bring it up because most of the time on this podcast, we talk about GPPs, and there are plenty of people that, even with projections, play cash games improperly or not strategically optimal. That I think it would be helpful. But I was this week. I'm going to take a couple of L's. Is that okay? We're going to have a debate that we started on Twitter. I'm taking an L there, but I'm taking it in a different way. So I'm okay. We'll get to that. I'm gonna take an L, but I'm also not. I'm also gonna probably end up arguing with you about it. So I'm gonna take a slight L. Fine. It's a different direction. I drastically overestimated how Maybe I underestimated how stupid people are in the low stakes, where in the luxury box, Jamal Williams was 75% owned. In the play action, he was 26% owned. Like how do I predict that? In the millie, he was 36% owned. I was under the impression he would be at minimum in the large field GPPs 40% owned.
Yeah.
I was going under the impression that he was 40% owned. I ended up at like 33% of him, and I played a bunch of like Gibson, David Johnson, and I would play Gio in those lineups with the two cheap running backs instead of Jamal, and then I would play Jamal with one of those Gibson, David Johnson, Joshua Kelly. I thought Joshua Kelly was in that range, and a lot of people were going to play Justin Jackson, and I thought a lot of people would play Keenan Allen. So I thought Josh Kelly was like a double leverage point of like, oh, it's negatively correlated to Allen, but it's also negatively correlated to Justin Jackson. So I kind of get both of those there. The Chargers do well. Kelly has 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and everyone's on Twitter going, I can't believe I played Justin Jackson because what I saw last week. Right? It's one of those type. And It turns out I ended up being correct because Kelly got more work than Jackson. But the scores didn't matter at running back. If you got 20 points at running back, who gives a shit? I mean, everyone did. For the most part. But that, to me, that was my biggest incorrect assumptions in ownership. I think my 3 were, I thought Jamal Williams was going to be much higher owned than he was at the low stakes. At the high stakes, he was. So for you, that was fine. I thought Devontae Adams would be much higher owned. In the play action, he was 19% owned. I thought he would be like 26, 27% owned. And I still was over the field on him. And then Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen came in the play action, low stakes, ended up 12% owned. I thought he was going to be 22, 24%. I thought he would be one of the highest owned wide receivers on the slate. That's why I was light on him and more on Kelly and Mike Williams. And the same reason why I thought Jamal Williams was going to be 40% owned. I had a bunch of MVS going out and doing wind sprints for no points. Because it's at virtually the same price at a different position, negatively correlated to Jamal Williams. But had I known, remember I always say, like, I judge based on, had I known in my low stakes, large field GPPs, I would have just jammed twice as much as I can on Jamal Williams and not even bothered with a lot of that type of leverage. And I wouldn't have bothered as much with some Mike Williams and MVS and played even the field. I would, instead of playing Keenan Allen like 10 of my 150 lineups, I would have played him in like 30 like that. And then, you know what that would have led me to? To play Herbert stacks.
Yep.
Right? Because now how do I go under on Keenan Allen and then play Justin Herbert? I can't. I mean, I'm playing Josh Kelly as the direct negative correlation to that. So to me, that those are my L's of, I mean, I think they're reasonable L's. I mean, I overestimated the sharpness. I figure it's week 7, then we get less bad players. The news comes out with Aaron Jones and people do what they normally do with, like, not late news. Like we had a week last season where Latavius Murray, right, for the Vikings. This is when he was for the Vikings. It was 2 years ago, right, or something like that for the Vikings. Like Dalvin Cook was like ruled out like at inactives.
Oh yeah.
Right, and then he ended up like 6% owned and put up 25 points. And when I saw the news, I like jammed him into 40% of my lineups because like 90 minutes before the slate, people don't at the lower stakes, large field, they don't react that quickly. But we had the Aaron Jones news on Friday, so I just expected people to be more likely to take out Gio in their lineups and play Jamal Williams.
Same.
So
I agree.
That's why I was evenish on the field. I still played. He had the highest target score probability in my model for any position and any price. So like it's not like I didn't want to play him, but I just thought there were enough leverage points at cheap running back that there are paths for him to fail. So he'll fail enough times that I should do it. But I just expected to be leveraged off of like 50 to 60% versus 26% in the play action. Like, what are people doing? But at the higher stake, you noticed at the higher stakes in the single entry, like all the stuff that I said, like we do this every week, right, Eric? Everything that I said that was a bad decision to me, probably was if you knew that people were jamming in Jamal Williams and Devontae Adams, you would have been like, well, maybe I should have played more Antonio Gibson.
Right.
Did you?
Yeah, I think. No, I played.
You did. You did it. You've been on Antonio Gibson like every week this season.
Dude, I got so many L's to take. I can't. We got to start. I got a list here in front of me. Gibson, yeah.
Well, I'm only saying Gibson not because he did well. Like I'm not. You're not taking the L because he did well. You're taking the L because he's been like 5K for the entire season, and you've been playing him every week. And now he's playing as a favorite against the Cowboys, and you're like, no.
The perfect synopsis of how my week went is.
And he was leveraged. He was price leverage at running back. It's like the perfect storm.
It's just it just didn't work. How you talk about like racking and stacking priorities, and this is also part of where like my L comes in. I'll get to that one second. But anyway, I'm racking and stacking priorities of how I'm gonna attack this slate, and like I totally get like the MVS thing. I think that was a totally fine play. I decided I didn't want to do that, so I was basically just like outright fading the Packers-Texans game. I didn't have a strong feeling on a way to leverage against Devontae and Jamal Williams, and I didn't want to, the secondary correlations I didn't like that much. They didn't fit my builds. Like I just couldn't get anything that worked attacking that game. And then you see, obviously Jamal is 75% in the luxury box, as he should be. Devontae's 40%. But then Deshaun ended up being one of the most popular quarterbacks. Again, rightfully so. But that bumped up like Brandon Cooks. So like even if you wanted to play that secondary correlation, Brandon Cooks is like 15%. Like Brandon Cooks is the goddamn guy that every single week for whatever reason, just like nobody even like talks about him. He projects fine. He projects fine. But just because these Texans games are so popular, he's the one who gets this huge ownership boost. So you see Cooks is like top 10, top 15 owned or whatever player at higher stakes. So anyway, I just couldn't get comfortable with attacking that game. So I just went to different builds. So like, and like, that was like my, if we're taking a stand, my stand was on the Bills, the Bills Jets game. That was, not a direct leverage point, but a way to flip the roster construction build away from the cheap running backs onto cheap wide receivers, onto an expensive quarterback that's not owned, onto and Diggs was like reasonably owned, but that stack was unowned. People moved away from Gabriel Davis as a punt, who I loved more than the field did, and the Jets bringbacks were all free. So I
thought they were free until you do that every week, unless it's Jamison Crowder. They're not free.
They were overpriced, is what I found out. $3K, they should have paid me $3K to roster Jets players. But that was my logic, right? I couldn't get comfortable with leveraging some of the chalk in ways if I were you, I would have done. So give me some of the MVS thing, and then obviously I'm playing some of Jamal, I'm playing Devontae, whatever. But I played two teams. I loved that Bills game. That was my stand. So I went after the Bills game, which flipped the build for me to expensive running backs with the cheap wide receivers, which I was fine with. I was totally fine with that. Obviously, that was horrible. I got third to last in the luxury box with the Bills stack. I scored like 92 points or something like that. But I'm comfortable with that general thought process. It just obviously didn't work. Where I really screwed up is on my second team. I was really debating.
So this was well, you're going to get into a team that's worse than that didn't even score 100 points.
Well, it scored more points, but it was a bigger mistake.
Okay, which is the right attitude to have.
It's a bigger L. It scored a lot more points actually, but is a much bigger L, which I think will lead into our kind of discussion and disagreement. So I kind of just outlined my thought process on I didn't feel comfortable leveraging Packers, whatever. I was going to stack another game, obviously. And I had the feeling on Sunday morning that the Seahawks game was not going to be as owned as I had originally thought earlier in the week. We take a step back to like Wednesday, and this is part of like the late Aaron Jones news and the mix and stuff and all. There's a lot of factors, and Michael Thomas, Manuel Sanders, a lot of shit happened that changed projections and changed ownership. But if we go back to like Wednesday, before we got all of this news, if you ran optimals, if you ran Roto Grinders optimals, I remember I was listening to one of the shows and Dean said it. He ran optimals on Wednesday, and Tyler Lockett was in like 98% of optimals. You know, Deontay Johnson was another example that, you know, was an awesome play, would have been in people's cash game lineups on Wednesday, but obviously then ended up low owned because of late news. So I felt very, very strongly about the Seahawks Cardinals game being the best game of the day. I was torn a little bit on exactly where the ownership would come in on Sunday morning, because getting Jamal Williams opening up gave you more paths to play that team. But I also had the feeling, kind of like we talked about with, you know, like Cowboys Giants before, you know, a few weeks ago, where people thought it would be very popular coming into the week just because of the total and the offense and the shitty defense and all that people were galaxy braining themselves into not playing it, because they did not project as all the best point per dollar plays. But the game, from a ceiling perspective, and as we know and as we saw, the game had just as much upside, if not more, than any. So I was really honestly kind of torn as to how to attack my second game. And so since I didn't have total conviction on exactly where that ownership would come in, like if you would have told me Sunday night hit and Lockett and Metcalf and Hopkins are all 20 to 25%, and Jamal was 75% and Gio was 60, and people did that, I would not have been surprised. But I also was not surprised because I just had that feeling in my gut that people were just going to go to the best plays, and then Lockett and Metcalf and Hopkins and Russ is 5%. Like, then those guys are all 10%. Like, and I think, you know, that was in my opinion a mistake to then just go to another game, which is what I did, and I went to the Atlanta game. And frankly, that didn't really give me any, it gave me, again, I kind of went to a different build, and like it allowed me to play DeAndre Swift. So I went with the Swift route and included him in my stack, and the two stud Falcons wide receivers, and Galladay, but Galladay wasn't that low owned, and even like Julio wasn't. It just was a mistake. Like the game did okay. Galladay did okay. Swift scored. Blah blah blah. It was fine, but I think in general it was bad process because of a lot of the things that we've been talking about here, and we may, like you said, disagree on the exact specifics of that Seattle game, but that was kind of my logic. And I was like telling myself on Sunday morning, like, man, I don't think this is going to be that popular, even though all week everybody's like, oh my God, Seattle, Arizona, what an awesome game. Everybody's going to stack it, blah, blah, blah. And then, it wasn't low owned. I agree. But I'll take, clearly Tyler Lockett has a decent amount of upside at 6,600 at 10%. If he was 10K, you needed him. He scored 50 fucking points. So it was just that whole, like, figuring out kind of that process. I think was just, I regretted it so much after I saw ownerships, throughout the day come in.
Right. And me, for small field, for large field and everything, I literally X'd out the game.
Yeah.
I just X'd out. I no piece, no nothing,
Mm-hmm.
Because this is what I figured. The correlation between those pieces, Kyler was chalk. He was the chalkiest quarterback in the slate. So I have to expect that Hopkins is the pairing partner. Kirk will get some of it. So, like, okay, I have to expect if Kyler is popular in GPP, he's going to have to be paired with someone. Okay, so there's one side of the game, and then if you play Russ, he's extremely correlated with both. They all do well, they both do well. We get the rare occurrences that one of the receivers gets like everything, which is what happened. But most of the time, if you're playing that, you're playing a double stack. If you're gonna play, you could play a skinny stack. You could have done, if you're gonna play a skinny stack. We're arguing over, I think, very small percentage points of. I expected in my fields that the ownership of Hopkins and Metcalf and Lockett to be around 13 to 15%. And I thought the efficient ownership was 10%. So, like, it's not a drastic difference, but I thought that from a directional standpoint, that if I was off, I probably was going to be off by too much. By they would be more owned.
Yeah.
I was right. That's why I'm taking my L. Like,
Mhm.
I was like, I think the efficient ownership is somewhere in the 10, 11% range, and I think they're going to be 14%. And if I'm wrong, they're going to come in at 17%, right? Like, I'm going to be wrong in the other direction. But if we look, this is where, like, I'm taking an L, because if we take a look at stakes, so we're going to take reverse L's here. This is basically all we're doing is taking reverse L's. Because I think you were right in the wrong contests, and I was wrong in the right contests. So I'm taking a look right here in Results DB on RotoGrinders. It's free, so you could go to RotoGrinders and check it out. Across the luxury box, the Wildcat, the power sweep, the millie, and the play action. So a good swath of high stakes, then high stakes multi-entry, then 3 max high stakes, and then kind of the lower stakes, whatever. DeAndre Hopkins was more owned in the higher stakes. 11%, 12%. In the millie, he was 9%. In the play action, he was 7%, or almost 8%. Then I'm going to go over to Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was more owned in the higher stakes. 11% in the luxury box, 15% in the Wildcat, 14% in the power sweep. But in the play action, he was 9%. Then I'm going to go over to Kirk, for instance. Kirk was actually lower owned in the high stakes. Kirk, the cheaper piece of the Arizona game, 7% in the luxury box, but 14% in the play action. If we take a look at Russell Wilson, about even. Like, no dramatic, because both sides of the game, I get it. But then we take a look at Metcalf. Metcalf, 11% in the luxury box, but 14% in play action. Metcalf was at a higher price, more owned in lower stakes. But the reason for that? Recency bias.
Yep.
Metcalf was the most recent big game. Lockett didn't have the big game. So people jump on that. And Lockett ended up twice as less owned in the low stakes. It was flipped at the high stakes. So knowing that, having known that, you underestimated ownership, right? You thought it would come in low owned, like if that game came in at 9-10% in the higher stakes, you would have been right. You were kind of directionally right, but it came in at 11-12%, which to me, we could argue semantics was efficient. So if you don't think that's efficient, that's another story. We're not arguing over strategy now. We're just arguing over what our projections look like, right? What the stack, that's all we're arguing over. And you could argue about that for years. Okay, well, no, who cares?
and when we have no idea who's right, it is what it is. And I think that was generally what our difference was. Like on Twitter, I do think I think the efficient ownership should have been a little bit higher, and that was why I thought it was a mistake.
But it came in. But what I'm saying about the reverse L's is that in the higher stakes, they actually did get played more in the lower stakes. So for instance, if you would have played that, if you thought that 12% was efficient ownership, if you played them in high stakes, like you didn't do anything special. Like you were about you're playing them in at the efficient level. But really, I made the mistake by Xing them out because they actually came in way less owned. And I was more likely, because of recency bias, to play Lockett. Lockett obviously projected way better than Metcalf for DraftKings. Vandal was different because of the pricing. That I would have played a lot more Wilson, Lockett, because I probably would have just not played Kyler at chalk. I would have said I'm taking the other side of the game. And I would have played Wilson, Lockett, Hopkins. Wilson, Lockett, Kirk. And I would have been more likely to play more Hopkins as leverage off of Adams.
Yeah.
Because I thought Adams was more owned than he ended up being. And not play Kirk, because instead of playing Kirk, you know who I play? Deontay Johnson one-offs. And he did great. Like, that was my L. To me, the L isn't in our That's why I said before in the beginning of the show, I'm going to take L's, but I'm taking a reverse L. Because it's like, I don't think the point I was making on Twitter with you was I'm going to stick by it. That's what I think the efficient ownership is 12%. If you think it's different, whatever. You thought it would.
Yep.
You thought it would be lower. You thought the efficient ownership was 15, and it would come in lower than that. And you were correct if you thought the efficient ownership was 15. If you thought the efficient ownership was 11, then it didn't come in under that. So, like, I was correct based on my assumption, and you were correct based on your assumption. Yet we both made the same mistake in different directions. Right?
Exactly.
You're right. You didn't play that stack, and I think that was the more of the correct move. You're taking an L on that, and I think in your contests they were efficiently owned, and if you didn't want to play them, you didn't want to play them. But I made the mistake by overestimating the field, and I should have been playing more than them. If I would have known that Lockett was going to come in at single-digit ownership, I'm thinking Lockett's going to be 14% owned. I thought Lockett was going to be, in my contests, the ownership that Metcalf was, and Metcalf would be owned what Lockett was. I didn't take into that as much account of the recency bias, which typically affects more casual, lower stakes players in the large fields. I just didn't think that with the $600 price difference that you're going to play Metcalf at 7,200 over Lockett at 6,600. Especially, I mean, I'm looking at projections. And even if you're not looking at projections, why wouldn't you take the $600 savings? And I would have jammed in more. I still probably wouldn't have got there because there's no way I land on a construction that has like 5 or 6 chalk pieces in it. So it's not anything I could have done. But the decision point, because I think in general, and I talked about it on the Morning Grind podcast with Stevie at RG, that this was some of the biggest discrepancies in ownership I've seen all season, and I misjudged. I gave the field too much credit, I guess, in my contests, and you gave them too little credit.
Correct.
Right? Because like people just jammed in Kamara and Jamal Williams and Devontae Adams. I mean, and obviously you got there if you did that, right? But like if you know, Eric, if you know that like Kamara at his price is 70% owned, and Mike Davis is 6% owned, like why aren't you playing Mike Davis? Like I did that in large. I did that in my. I played a lot of Davis and Hunt because it was in non-Kamara lineups. But Kamara in the play action was 44% owned. So, like, I still played, like, 32% of Kamara, so I still had him. But in every Kamara lineup, I played Anderson or Moore, right? Like, I was like, I'm not going to play a chalk piece at that price without a correlated piece that I think is going to be, like, 10% owned, like, something like that. But, like, at higher stakes, like, if I take a look at Anderson was 8% in the luxury box. Moore was 7% in the luxury box. Can you please tell me, should I be playing these contests? Because, like, I maybe I'm just leaving money on the table because I'm going to quote where the bad players are. But how could Kamara be 68% owned and the combined obvious run backs of even a secondary correlation if you're not playing a Bridgewater stack be only a combined 15% owned in that field? And like, why wouldn't you play? Like, how people just playing Kamara one-offs as like okay, I'm going to play a 70% owned guy with no correlation and just like not take advantage of the field.
This is why I think I was a little frustrated this week, and not because of even like anything that we've talked about, but like going back to our cash game conversation, all those like cash lineups that we talked about, like, the 3 optimal cash game lineups, they were like duped multiple times in like the luxury box. People refused this week to get, and now it wouldn't have mattered, right? We're having all this conversation about how like big of a mistake this was and that was. And at the end of the day, like I would still be sitting here having lost. But
no, hold on. I want to clarify that because I mean, this is what I mean by I like these types of weeks because it gives confirmation bias for the long run. Because people will look back at like, remember when Will Fuller was mega chalk and then he still put up 55 points? And McCaffrey, that build was just 3. I mean, like the winning score that week was in the Millie was like 330 or something. Like that people remember that. They don't realize the 16 other weeks it's not like that. So so people think, well, I can win this way, so I'm just going to I tweeted out like I welcome these cash lineups into my GPPs. I welcome them. I hope this reinforces the fact that you just play the best plays and print, but all the people that are patting themselves on the back for doing well in GPPs didn't win. They profited, but they didn't win first place. So they're going to try to recreate that and then still not win first place doing that, unless you have your Jeff Wilsons out of nowheres or whoever, you had a Cole Beasley build or something where he had 25 points out of the blue. It's not a long-term profitable strategy, especially in contests that have much top heavier. Like even the Wildcat is like 300,000 a first, and like by seventh place, you're like it's $10,000. Like you can't jam. You're not going to be able to jam in your cash lineup and get first place in those contests. So like, and you're definitely not going to do it in the larger field stuff. So I hope people they go into week 8 going, well, I'm just going to take the best plays, and I hope more people do that. But I don't understand. Like I don't want to sound like I'm calling out otherwise good players that play in these contests. I want to learn. See, this I question. I'm just a blunt New Yorker. I'm just a Jewish guy from New York, and I it sounds like I'm speaking down to people. I'm not. I'm just I believe in the teaching style of exaggeration. In order to get a point across, I'd rather go to the most exaggerated level on both sides. Just so I could put my head around the concept, so we don't get tied into nuance of like when I said get Robbie Anderson and Keenan Allen were close enough. I don't want to get into the nuance of, well, he had a 31% target share and he had a 26, like, because that's not an exaggerated example. Keenan Allen was a much higher projected play than Braxton Berrios. Okay, like. Can we understand? If you can't even understand that, well, then you have nothing to start with. So, like, that's why you have to go to the exaggerated examples. But can someone explain to me how you could play such? Because even like Jamal Williams, like I'm going to put in Brandon Cooks, was 13% owned. Okay, Brandon Cooks was 13% owned. Fuller was 8% owned. This is the luxury box. It's an 11 entry max, $3,000 entry contest. I surmise it's one of 3 things. Because I'm asking, how could someone play? I mean, you can. I'm not saying you can't, but how could Jamal Williams be 75% and 68% on Alvin Kamara and have the Carolina wide receivers and the Texans wide receivers be that low owned in comparison? And I'm assuming the ownership on those guys are tied to Kamara. So I'm assuming if I download the CSV, which I may do just to take a look and see the correlation between Kamara and Williams and those guys, that if Fuller was in a lineup, it was with Jamal Williams. So like I'm looking at these ownerships of like Moore is 7% and Anderson is 8%. I'm assuming they're not, those guys are, you're not going to find a lineup with them as a one-off with no New Orleans player. Correct. That they're probably tied to Kamara. I don't understand why more people don't do it because it's correlative. I either think one, people are just building, their cash lineups and jamming it in. 2, they're just purely going by projection and not adding correlations. Or 3, there's some reason that I don't understand and I want to learn why that's not being, especially since I'm coming from a background in large field GPPs where it's obvious that maximizing correlation and leverage is the correct strategy. So like I know the luxury, how many people are in the luxury box? Let me go to the summer. Let me go to
300, I think.
Yeah, 371.
Yeah, there you go.
371 is still big enough that you shouldn't be jamming in your cash lineup.
Correct.
Right? So like yeah, I understand if it's the Thunderdome. Okay, a 30-person contest, 80, even 80, and even if you're jamming in your cash lineup with a 2v2 switch, in a less than 100, okay, I could put up my hands and go, okay, it's not what I would do, but it has a reasonable enough chance to win first place. But in a 371 entry contest, and it's not single entry, you could play 11 entries into this contest. Or no, 3, that wasn't 3. That was 4. Of maybe it's a reason that I don't understand yet. Maybe that someone could explain to me this. 3 is people that are playing above their bankroll and they're too scared to not cash it. Because that's understand that's another that's the reason I don't play. That's the reason I don't play it. Because like, I'm not going to play a $3,000 entry contest and not play correctly. But I have to be willing to that if I come in last place, I lose $3,000. Right. That I'm not looking to come in to to win $6,000 coming in, because you still have to place in like the top 20% to even like double your money. So you got to play a leverage lineup in some way. To some extent, unless all the chalk hits, and this is when if you played your cash lineup in the luxury box. Let me go to the exact. I'll go to the exact. The winner was obviously the guy that won the millie, Shanks a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So he won, but I'm just looking at the cash line. Like if I played my cash line, which was 216, I would have came in around 17th, 18th place for $10,000. It's a $3,000 entry. So I would have essentially tripled my money. But I could have played 1,000. I could have played, there's no $3,000 triple ups, but I could have played that instead, right? That would have been giving me better equity because I don't need to come in anything more than that. But like if you played that 208 lineup, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it was duplicated 6 times in the luxury box, you doubled up. The luxury box pays the top, what it looks like, 50 out of 371. Double ups would pay the top, 160 out of that? And you're playing a lineup that's both duplicated, non-correlated, not leveraged. And I mean, it's either because they're just, it's the Empire Maker. I play one lineup and jam it into everything. And then you're playing with so much volume that, whatever you cash in the luxury box is just the bonus. It's just like whatever it is, it is. I don't understand it. I mean, me and Stevie talk about it on the morning grind, and who knows? Maybe this is a leak, and I'm saying that you shouldn't have this leak. But it's hard for me. It's hard, Eric. It's hard for me to balance these two concepts in my head. Okay, so at some point, sometimes I think I have imposter syndrome, right? That it's like, well, I'm not as good as these people, so obviously it has to be I'm missing it, right? And then you think in terms of, well, I'm looking at the names in these contests, and it's like some of these names are people that that's who I studied to learn how to play, right. And I'm going, how many of these guys that, well, they're obviously good and they're profitable at this game. And they're doing that, and all my logic says that making those decisions are strategically negative EV. I mean, or at least less positive EV, right? At least lower EV. Yeah. Why are they doing it?
I think it's a combination of a bunch of different things, most of which you hit on. There's definitely cash lineups in there. There's definitely some of the Empire Maker, concept of some of these high stakes guys build one team or a couple of teams. Some of them definitely, that's how, that's how we got here. Is I did the same thing as you, and I studied some of these guys and adapted my game, because I do think some of them play with a little bit of those leaks. They will I don't even know how to describe it perfectly. But they just will not fade Kamara. As you see, guys like that get to 70%.
Yeah, but then why not play? But I looked at projections. There's not going to be a projection model. I did, unless maybe they have proprietary models that are ridiculously different. Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore projected well.
Agreed.
Right. It's not. They were in the top 10 from a salary adjusted value at wide receiver. They weren't in the top 5, but they were in the top 10. So I just don't understand how we don't see some of that. Like I'm taking a look at Uticau's lineup. He had 11. He had one that scored 206. He had one that scored 210. Let me take a look at this one. Okay? I'm going to look at the 210. Let me bring it up. Can I put it on? Let me put it on the screen even.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't see the screen.
While you're doing that, it's like this trickle down effect where they are like, outside of the people like putting in cash teams, they are still like they understand stacking and game stacking and that kind of stuff. But you get the top projected plays, and then they just like run out of roster spots. So, you pivot to whatever, Deshaun Watson, and then, okay, so maybe you do play Brandon Cooks with them, or this is probably a poor example that didn't get utilized, but we'll use my example, because I played Kamara without one of the bringbacks, but I full stacked the Bills game. I went all in on the Bills game and flipped the build with expensive running backs, 3 expensive running backs, and tried to leverage the Cowboys game going the opposite direction. We saw how well that works, but tried to leverage that going the opposite way, and then going the cheap wide receiver route versus the expensive wide receiver route. So that's a path that sometimes I do think some people take, and some obviously I take myself. But I think in general you get people playing cashier teams and not utilizing the secondary correlations. They are playing some sort of stack with the best plays around it. So they are the okay, I'll play Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen. And a lot of times, maybe not even use a bring back. Sometimes they do use a bring back, but then it's just the best plays around it. So it's a lot of those types. So you get the pretty much cash teams. You get the variations of cash teams with those kinds of pivots with the best plays around it. And then you get people kind of like me, full gal braining like game stacks and fading chalk and stuff. So you see, but that's why, like we talk about, that's where I think my long-term advantage is that's how they're building. And so I am thinking about secondary correlations and where are my advantages based on their ownership. And that was also part of, not to go back to the Seahawks thing, but that was part of why I think it was a mistake, was because I went to the Falcons game, which allowed me to get away from Kamara. I wasn't leveraged. I didn't play anybody in that game. I almost played the Saints defense, but anyway, it allowed me to just get to a different build. But I'm fading Devontae for other expensive wide receivers, Julio, Ridley, Galladay. But then I'm also fading Kamara because I'm playing all the expensive wide receivers. And then you can do things like Gibson. You can do different things there to still get your leverage against the field. But that was why I was like, God damn it, why did I do it with the Falcons game when I could have done Russ, Lockett, Metcalf, Hopkins instead? And the general ownership was basically the same as what I did with Galladay and Julio, so I didn't, that was just my personal, preference on that kind of a pivot. But I think in these contests, it's pretty much a combination of what you said, and then just a couple of other little, people are just playing, conservative projection based lineups without thinking about secondary correlations and all the different leverage and stuff
not
like
all
that.
of them. I'm looking at Uticau's lineups. I wanted to bring them up. I consider Uticau, it's maybe other people have different opinions. I consider Uticau to be the greatest overall DFS player of all time.
Yeah, he's unbelievable.
In all four. I mean, I think Osimo, I would put in large field GPPs. He's probably the best large field GPP player ever. But from an overall, as far as 3 max single entry cash games, everything, Uticau is the player. He's not on Twitter. I don't know. Who knows? He's an enigma. I don't know him or her.
I met him.
Who knows?
I met him once, and he's the nicest, softest spoken guy ever. It's so fun.
Really?
It's so funny.
I've learned the most from, like, if I had to choose a player that I've learned the most from, it's him. from
Yeah.
studying. I mean, for 5 years of studying lineups, like the go-to guy for GPP, whatever. David Mock, another one. Mock. I mean,
Yep.
overall, all formats, all contest types, all everything. You know, they may not be number one, and we could argue who's number one out of the top like 10 players. All great
Right.
and different formats, but overall, like Utica. So we take a look at the luxury box. He has 11 entries, and he plays 2 in the top in caching spots. But I don't know if you're looking at it on results, DB.
I have it.
Okay, the 206.48 because I have it up on the screen here on YouTube. So let's first go over the chalk. He has Williams and Adams in there. Okay, that's fine. And he has Kamara in there. That's fine. But then instead of playing Gio Bernard, he plays Antonio Gibson, right? And to correlate that with the Washington football team, who's the high owned also. I mean, we take a look at this lineup. The ownership in this lineup has very chalky players in it. But instead of playing a chalk quarterback, he's playing Herbert to correlate with Allen and Henry. And Allen and Henry are both 22% owned. But the run back is DJ Chark at 4%. So he's playing the 3+1 with the lower owned quarterback, the low owned 4% running back, the 4% wide receiver correlated run back, and the leverage running back in the range of Gio Bernard that correlates with the defense. This is a type of team where this is the barbell type of team. Ate a ton of chalk, but correlated. The one he basically played the chalk one-offs. Kamara, Adams, Williams, and just like, okay, now I'm playing correlated, but he's playing Allen and Henry. Like the Chark and Gibson gives him the leverage. And that's all he needed. That's all. I mean, he came in 47th place, but like I take a look at that lineup, and then he has a 210-72 lineup. Same thing. Jamal Williams and Devontae Adams are in this lineup. Okay? So what does he do? He plays Aaron Rodgers with them. Runs it back with Will Fuller. Okay? That absolutely makes sense. A 3+1. Plays Giovanni Bernard as chalk. Plays Antonio Gibson. So now he's playing 3 cheap running backs. So this is leverage off of a Kamara type of build. And plays Keenan Allen, because high projected wide receiver play. And because he's not playing Kamara, he's going to leverage off of Kelsey ownership by playing Darren Waller was my highest exposed tight end on Sunday. Because if you were going up, you're playing Kelsey. And if you're not playing Kelsey, you're probably going in the mid-range.
Yep.
And that's why I played a bunch of, I played some Chris Godwin, kind of 1-1s. I know, having conversation on Twitter with Adam, shit my money about like Brady was an option. He was low owned. Yes, you could play him. I was more concerned about the target tree. Like if I were going to stack, it would basically just be with Godwin. I had to it was one of those things that even for me, I had to prioritize. He was there. I considered it. He was just really. I just cut it out. I wanted to get more Matt Ryan. That didn't work out. But I mean, it was one of those things. I get it. It's just that after Godwin and maybe Gronk, because he seems to be back. Like, he's throwing touchdowns to Tyler Johnson. He's throwing touchdowns to Scotty Miller. Cameron Brate's there. Ronald Jones out of the backfield. Fournette out of the backfield getting catches. Yep. Like, I'm just looking, going, like, if I'm wrong on Godwin, all these stacks are wrong. There's no, it's either going to be him or I got to hope that he's going to get concentrated production. So I didn't devote that much to him. But the lineup that we're looking at from Utica, look how much chalk he ate. He ate a ton of chalk and then in 2 spots, essentially. 3 spots. The Fuller correlated run back to the chalk. Why wouldn't you be doing that? I mean, you're playing a 75% Jamal Williams and a 34% Devontae Adams. You have the correlation with the quarterback already. Like, why is Will Fuller 8% owned? Why is Brandon Cooks 10% owned? And then Antonio Gibson is 4% owned versus Giovanni Bernard is 34% owned. He just played all 3 of them. And Darren Waller's sitting there at 12% ownership, and you're still playing the chalk defense. Came in 29th. But I look at these lineups, I'm like, these are the lineups I build. When I play the spy or the power sweep or, that type, this is how I build. So that's why I'm looking at lineups I'm going to go down. I'm going to scroll. We have it on the screen. Let's go to. Let's see. Okay. That was contrarian enough. I mean, we see some of these. I mean, like the 208 lineup is right in here, right? SRN 828, but he's also known for like just taking one lineup and putting it 150 times into stuff. But like even okay, how about Wiggins? Okay, Wiggins had a contrarian lineup. He had a 207.9. He had 3 entries into this. So he had Murray, Hopkins, Lockett. Okay, he did I think they're going to be less owned than people think they are. Still played Jamal Williams, but he played the reverse type of build, where he's playing 2 higher priced running backs, but he's playing the chalk. Kamara, Hunt, Williams, just jamming them in. And then playing Njoku and Davis as the one-offs. And it's not like they were like low owned, but they're not correlated. And see, like, I don't want to say that I have yes, a $3,600 player could get there. So like, I have no problem. Like, it's playing Gabriel Davis because Allen stacks get there. Kind of like if Davis has a big game, maybe Diggs has a big game. But at that price, it doesn't matter. So like,
see, this is where I would, and people laughed at me and probably will still laugh at me, but Chris Herndon was 3,000. I don't know why you would play David Njoku. You know, if you were set on this build, I don't know why you would play David Njoku when you have Hunt and the Browns defense. You know, but this is an example. Like, again, we can split hairs about that, and I understand if people are not interested in playing Chris Herndon, right? Like, right. I get it. But if you're playing Gabriel Davis, and Gabriel Davis is going to win you a tournament, you know, and catch two touchdowns, and Kareem Hunt and the Browns defense are going to win you a tournament, and Hunt's going to run for 102, and the Browns defense is going to dominate, and Njoku's not going to win you a tournament, most likely.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to me to do that, but that's where, look, Njoku just projected better, right? So people play that. This is just the tiny little nuance that comes into these teams in this. People aren't as worried about that secondary correlation. So that is the long-term edge, in my opinion. This is a good lineup, and these are the best players in the world.
We're really splitting. I mean, yeah, I could go down if we could find losing lineups, and I could show lineups that people like someone just that has $3,000 on them has one entry, and I go, why the hell did you play this? Right? Yeah. I mean, we could do that. So like the criticisms are like this. I'm looking at more of a trend. I'm looking at the same thing of like, well, why? Like, I take a look here, like for Papa Gates. He has a lineup at 207.2. That is a good lineup. He has a leverage at Waller. He's playing the Kyler Murray and Hopkins with no Seattle run back, which is, could get there. But like, he has DJ Moore as a one-off and no Kamara in his lineup. So like wouldn't it make more sense to play DJ Moore in a Kamara lineup than as a one-off? Like I said, I'm saying this, I want to be very clear. I'm saying this possibly being wrong. To my logical sense and how I put lineups together, I don't understand other than if the answer is that they plugged in a couple of players and the lineup builder said this is the best projected player for 5,600 and it didn't happen to be in a Kamara lineup, then I'm fine with that answer. And I'd be like, okay, that's exactly, then it's what people call projection whores. And if they have great projections, they're still fucking profitable like there's no tomorrow. I get it. But if that's the answer, I'm fine with that answer. But if there's some other answer, I'd love to know, because I look at it, to me, it doesn't fit the logic in which I play. And I'm not saying the way that I play is right. And I'm not saying the way that they play is wrong. Someone that plays my way wants to learn if there's anything that I'm not taking into account, or I'm overweighting, right? Maybe I'm overweighting correlation. Maybe I'm putting way too much stock into why play Herndon across from Davis when Njoku projects for like 4 median points more than Herndon. So you'd much rather, who cares about the correlation between two sides of a game, between the wide receiver 2 and a garbage Jets tight end? that you might as well just take the higher projected player there. That's probably the answer. I'm pretty sure that's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
For large field, if I played Chris Herndon in that lineup, he's 1% owned. I'm trying to beat 65,000 people. I'm trying to beat 167,000 people. This is a contest with 371 people. I would agree. That's probably the wrong move to me. You don't have to do that. But I'm still questioning why is Kamara so owned and Moore and Anderson not owned enough? Because we're not talking about Chris Herndon. We're talking about actual good plays at both positions that just weren't correlated enough. Here we go. Here's Hishbu. He has DJ Moore in a Kamara lineup. Okay, and he's James Robinson as a leverage play. Okay, I get it. I get this lineup, right? So it's contrarian. I'm gonna go to let's see, Tasteful Tides, right? Kamara, no, nothing. This is a Texan stack with this is a 3+2 and a Tyler Lockett one-off. See, to me, if you're playing Tyler Lockett as a one-off and you're already playing Kamara in your lineup, why isn't this Robbie Anderson?
Right, but this is just the perfect example of there's certainly good lineups in here, and I agree. I'm never claiming to have all the answers. I'm never claiming to say oh yeah, you have this secondary correlation 100% has to be played over the Njoku thing or over whatever. I'm not right.
We're not saying when I'm in the Roto
to all this.
Right, when I'm in the Roto Grinders Discord, a lot of times my answer to questions when people ask, do I play this guy or this guy, which doesn't make any sense. You have to show me the lineup in the contest it's in before I can answer that. Here's the three variables you have to consider. 1, projection. 2, and projection for GPP is ceiling probability. Ceiling probability or median, whichever one you want. I don't care. Number 2 is correlation, and number 3, leverage. So if you're going to tell me a 1v1, do I play this guy? My natural response is either play the guy that's higher projected, more correlated, or more leveraged. For whatever lineup you're in, I'm not looking at your lineup. I just see, do I play Robbie Anderson or Keenan Allen? That's all I see. But if you already have Hunter Henry in your lineup and not Justin Herbert, probably play Robbie Anderson, because now you're going to be playing a negatively correlated player with 2 receivers without the quarterback. That, to me, that makes sense. But if you tell me that you believe that Allen has a much higher ceiling probability than Robbie Anderson, and you don't care about the negative correlation, because the median and ceiling probability actually make up for the negative correlation, and it becomes a positive EV play in that lineup, that's perfectly fine. But now we're just arguing over projections. So right. I never want to argue over projections, because then it's just a matter of, I think my projections are better than your projections, and who knows who. I mean, if it makes logical sense in your, if for instance, Tasteful Tides said to me, I didn't play Robbie Anderson here because Tyler Lockett projected so much better than him that I wanted to play the better player, that makes sense. That then it's the correct move. All we're arguing over is the difference in projections, not the difference in the decision. His decision was based around his projections, and his projections showed Tyler Lockett higher, significantly enough higher than taking on the positive correlation of Robbie Anderson there. My projections had Robbie Anderson from a salary adjusted value, because obviously it was cheaper, $6,000, on the same level as Tyler Lockett. So, to me, my decision in this lineup would to be play Robbie Anderson based on my numbers. But if Tasteful Tides told me, oh yeah, Robbie Anderson was projected higher, was actually equal to Lockett, I would be like, dude, why not play him with Kamara? So
but I think to me, all this boils down to, you and I believe in those three things that you talked about, right? It's a combination. It is not any one individual thing. It is a combination and a nuanced view into projection, correlation, and leverage. And I am and have been successful. And who knows? Maybe I go broke continuing this. We don't know. I can't predict the future. if I'm going to win in these contests, it is my belief that I want to have to get as few things right as possible, and I want to what's the quote, because it's one of my favorite quotes. Capitalize my financial upside when I am right. So
right, Dink would say it's not about being right; it's about how much you win when you are right.
Exactly, and so I'm trying, and part of that is in those correlations. I know, we're using Chris Herndon. I legitimately played Chris Herndon on Sunday, so that tells you about how good my week went. But it was that. It was like, well, if I'm going to play a punt tight end, why, yes, Njoku looks better. Yes, Harrison Bryant looks better. But if I'm going to play one of these shit bums and the Bills are going to score 50 points, I might as well play the Jets guy. Obviously, that didn't work. But I believe, until I am proved wrong, which I haven't been proven wrong in my opinion yet, and because of some of the things you talked about, I look at Utical's lineups. He does this, right? Like, now this week was a weird week where, you had a lot of the chalk, but we also saw
hold on. On weeks where the chalk hits, correlation and leverage don't matter anymore. Like everyone scored the same amount of points. Like you didn't gain anything by correlating or like anything could happen when the chalk all smashes. You have to think in terms of what happens when some of the chalk. We have some weeks where all the chalk busts, but that doesn't happen that often either. It's usually a combination of both. Some chalk hitting, some chalk not hitting. And then if you got the leverage off of the chalk that didn't hit, like you profited. And if you took the leverage off the guy that did hit, you went down. So like that's the matter. So like using this week specifically that's not what I'm looking to do. I'm just looking, we had a week where the chalk was very condensed. Right, we have a week where everyone's 30%, 25%. Like then it's like how much you're not getting as much leverage because they're not as much owned. But when you have guys in contests that are 70, 75% owned, and you're not playing a correlated piece, so you're not like sharing the same points with 75% of the lineups. I look at results DB and I'm studying players, and I want to know why Uticow does it and not other people. Like, why does Makasupa do this and why does this guy do that? And some people, I know. I've studied players long enough to know that based on what I've seen over hundreds upon hundreds of slates, I tell people don't believe me. I study this every morning. I go into results DB at least 15 minutes. I mean, it may not be for that long, but this is what I'm doing. I'm studying their exposure sets and then looking at their lineups, not just how much they have above or below, just like, okay, what lineups did they create? And go through and see if there are things that I missed. If there are things that, okay, yeah, you're right, I could have made that correlation. That was good leverage. I didn't realize he was going to be that low owned, and then he made sense in these types of constructions. So that's why going through and looking and then asking like that. I don't just like look at this stuff and then go, oh, like most people look at this, what they'll do. You'll see on Twitter, right? You'll see it, especially on weeks where like sharp players don't do well, and they go, "Look, I beat so and so by 40 points in a head-to-head," and because they picked the players better, right? And go like, "Oh, these guys aren't shit," right? And I'm like, "No, these are the most skillful players in the entire world, and I want to learn from them. So I can't come across as, well, look at the mistakes that these guys are making, because I'm not." If I thought I was right enough, I'd be entering these fucking contests. I believe the skin in the game type of mentality of, I can't be the one talking about, they're not playing right if I'm not willing to put $3,000 on the line in order to prove them wrong. So that's why that's my attitude is, can someone reach out and tell me? Uticow is a soft-spoken guy. Maybe you have his number and tell me that is one of my assumptions that I posed correct. That people are just going by projection, and maybe I'm overvaluing correlation in comparison to projection, and that could be true.
I think it's an interesting thing to monitor that I'm going to continue to monitor. I believe in like the strong opinions loosely held. type of thing. And I think that's kind of what we're outlining here is this is what I believe and this is what you believe. And this is what has been successful for the both of us and for other good players. But we're seeing some things that can possibly contradict that. And I think it's worth discussing and it's worth considering, alternatives, because I don't know everything and I don't have every answer. But, I think, I haven't seen anything to, prove either you or I wrong, and I'm going to continue to operate with my strong beliefs. But just like you, I want to keep looking at what's happening, in specifically in these tournaments, like we've been discussing for the last while, and and talking with smart people and seeing what smart people are doing, and always considering, other alternatives.
Right, because it may be a field size thing. Like I said, like
Mhm.
I've binked 5 GPPs, large field, which is a lot of money when you bink those.
Mhm.
Seconds and top fives a bunch of times, and this is how I play. And when you win with Garrett Temple in basketball, right? And people, and because this is what ends up happening. Because this literally is what happened when I binked with Garrett Temple in my lineup at small forward for 3,800 or whatever the hell he was. This was one of the game. This was a game where there was like he was on the Grizzlies, right? And Dylan Brooks was
I
out,
remember.
right?
Yep, I
And
remember. I played him. Yep,
right,
yep.
it was
I
it was a
remember.
short rotation,
He had
and
like 10 threes or something like that.
right,
Yeah,
he went for like 42 points or something,
yeah.
and he actually wasn't the lowest owned player in my lineup, Toby Harris, because everyone was playing some other guy, and I played Toby Harris, and he had a ceiling game for 50 points. But he's a good player, so it's like no one questioned like why did you play Toby Harris? They're like, why did you play Garrett Temple? I said because I was playing D'Angelo Russell in the lineup. Like D'Angelo, they were playing the Nets at the time, right? There was net
Yeah.
something,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, based on the construction, I needed a $3,800 small forward, and why didn't you play this guy over him? Well, because I'll play the other side of the game because if the game goes over, I mean, it's a weak correlation in basketball, but it's still
Yeah.
positive.
Mhm.
So but people don't want to hear that. You know how many heads explode when people ask me, how'd you know? Why'd you pick Garrett Temple? It's like because he's a guy in the Grizzlies. It's like,
Mhm.
well, why didn't you pick that? Like, no, because he's a guy in the Grizzlies that fits small forward that everyone was playing, some $4,500 small forward as chalk or something, and I didn't. If I had the 4,500, I probably would have played that guy, but I didn't in the construction I had, and I'm like, I'll just play the correlated piece. I don't know. They're playing a 7-man rotation, so sure, maybe he go. And there he goes, and there you go, $100,000 later, and people don't want to accept that. Like my
Mhm.
choice was not based around basketball. Like it's not. Fuck if I know what's going to happen in a game, right?
Right.
No one was playing that game because they thought that the team was going to blow out, and I was, it was D'Angelo Russell at that time. He was like 6,800 or something, and he ended up being 7% owned for no reason. Like that's how I win. I play the good players that just based on construction just don't end up getting owned. But
Mhm.
the thing is that I'm describing a $100,000 GPP win from 2 years ago. So like I'm playing to do that 2 or 3 times a year. Like that's if I could do that 2 or 3 times a
Yep.
year, I've been successful over the past 5 years doing it 2 or 3 times a year. So like I know that it's that if I did it once and that's it, and I barely would. I look at my top 1% finishes, and it's garbage. Then I could chalk that up to luck. I could be like, okay, then
Mhm.
I'm on to something that's wrong, and I got lucky. But when I take a look at that I have well more than my fair share of 1% finishes over the course of 5 years of playing large field GPPs, and have 5 first place finishes and 5 second place finishes, and 20 plus top 5 place finish. Like I have, like the sample size gets to a point where like something of what I'm doing has to be correct in some way. And although I am using projections to some extent, I'm building lineups that I know are suboptimal from a median standpoint to get correlation and leverage. So, like when I see these things, it would be intellectually criminal for me to not ask questions. because I can't just assume that I'm right. And if
Yeah.
I am right and I'm not willing to put in $50,000 of volume to prove that, then you have to know that in my head, I'm not, I don't want to be overconfident. But also that's kind of a nitty, you know, I'm nitty. I could be, hey, if I can't, like, I could be 98% right. But like, I don't want to play. I don't want to put $50,000 until I'm 100% right. So like, because in my lifestyle, the way it is like I'm perfectly fine making $50,000-$70,000 a year, and you know, time and freedom and whatever. I don't need
Yeah.
all the money. But I still, from a game perspective, I always want to learn. So
Hmm.
even if it's something where either it's a leak from other players or I'm overvaluing correlation that even if I'm not going to compete in these $3,000 contests, I'd like to know so I can compete against the bad players and do well.
Yeah, I think I think it's a really good thing. Like because every week is so different, and we have seen even. I mean, you've won with like this kind of mindset that we've outlined here just in the last couple of weeks. But then we sat here and analyzed some of these teams, and we think maybe this is a leak in some of these guys' games. I'm excited to kind of stack up more data points, like next week when we're talking at this time and go through, because the odds that a slate goes just like Sunday went are almost none. So going back through, and now we can compare, like, right, okay, let's pull up Wiggins lineup now. Let's pull up Utah's lineups from this week, and we have this reference point of week 7, and kind of bounce it back and forth. And the more you start to stack these things up, I think it tells a little bit clearer picture. And I just like you said, saying it again, I believe passionately in what we're talking about, that it is the right way to play all contests, including this this high stakes small field contest. It has, like, same thing for you. It has, over a long sample, it has worked for me. It did not. It honestly hasn't worked very well for me this NFL season, but I don't think it's because of the strategy. I think it's sometimes shit happens.
It's variance. It's only been 7 weeks. I mean, NFL is all small sample size.
And we've even talked on here where, like, some of the holding L's, I've made mistakes. Everybody makes fucking mistakes. I've made mistakes this year, and like you said, sometimes there's variance. I've had a couple of good weeks where it was close, and you just don't get the ball. You get the top 1% team that just, the ball just doesn't bounce your way, so you don't get the 100K score. That's just how it goes. But I believe passionately, and that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why you did the book. Believe passionately, and believe over the long sample that this proves itself out. It's just the whole concept of not trying to be right the most. You're trying to profit the most when you're right. Is something that there's tons of week to week variance over. And this was a week where that mindset didn't work very well. But maybe next week, it goes the other way.
Well, if anyone has the answers, you could email, most people, I say, send us the questions, right? Send questions at questions.
Send me the answers. Yeah.
Right. I want the answers. So questions at theoryofdfs.com. I know a couple of people have already sent in questions. A lot of the questions are like evergreen type of questions. They're not like on the specific slate. So if you sent them in already, we're not ignoring it. It's just that it depends on what comes up and in the content. We will answer them periodically throughout. So feel free to always send them in. Questions at theoryofdfs.com. And we'll always want to have something to talk about on a week-to-week basis. And then most likely we're not going to run out of things. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I know it seems like there's only a limit of things that you could talk about DFS game theory, but there really isn't, because the contest differences and trends and new information that more people have. I mean, it always changes. And that's why I think when I put together the 15-hour audio course, like, I'm not scared that more people learn how to play better. I believe that if you take the course, 15 hours, theoryofdfs.com, that you will be a better player. I have a 5-year head start on you on implementing this. Just like in poker, that you could feel free to read all the books you want on poker. and then go and sit at the table and actually try to implement that in practice, you're not going to be good at doing it in the beginning. You're now going to not be a bad player. Now you've just by reading everything, you've become a near break even player. Like now from a long term, you're not going to lose all your money. But in order to actually be a profitable player, like you have to learn to implement this on your own without DMing me, right? Those types of things and looking and reading articles and whatever on a week-to-week basis. You have to have a replicated process that you could assess all of these variables, and every slate is different. Every poker hand is different in the same way. So that's why I think that I'm still going to have an advantage. If everyone thought this way, it would just become just a really more a chess-like type of game, and I think I'd be better at it. So like why wouldn't I? I mean, yes, the really bad players may now get better. How many? Hey, until this YouTube channel and this podcast gets 1 million subscribers, gets 50,000, 100,000 subscribers, I think we're fine. I think there's enough Joe Schmoes that don't know how to play well, or average players that play optimals in GPPs and stuff like that, play the best plays type of people. That like I still think I people ask, what do I have all the answers? No, I don't have all the answers, but all the answers that I have, I will tell you. Like I 100%. You want to see my roto tracker? You could do anything you want. I truly believe that in the long run, the more people that are interested in DFS and the more that the ecosystem could remain healthy, that from a long-term perspective, that makes me more money. So
yeah,
it's better.
At the end of the day, no matter how quote unquote sharp, no matter how many people apply some of these strategies that we think are successful, you're playing a game against other humans. It's still a game. That game theory isn't based around the fact of the DFS structure. It's based around the fact that you're playing a game against other humans. So there will, like you said, you have a 5-year head start. These people can learn everything that we talk about that we think is successful, or that other players think is successful that might contradict, but whatever the winning strategies are, doesn't really matter, because the game always changes because we're playing against other humans. Successful strategies 5 years ago were different than they are now. A lot of things still remain the same, but things will always change because I'm playing against you and I'm playing against thousands of other people or hundreds of other people, and what they do impacts what is successful, not picking the best players like you talked about.
Right. So, it used to be in if you played poker in the 70s or 80s, if you just played the best starting hands and kind of played straightforwardly and a couple little deceptive moves, you were probably very profitable. And then once the 2000s came around, and then now you're seeing amateur players continuation betting into you, and and making a little bit more aggressive moves, and know the value of position versus their starting hand. Like now that becomes an edge over the bad players. And then now it's 2020, and if you're just going to sit there trying to play monkey poker, you're going to get crushed, because like the now people have adopted based on what the field knows and found counter strategies against it.
Yep.
So maybe we're in a period now where what we're talking about is much more prevalent, and this is a way to get an edge over much of the field. And then 5 years from now, we may be, Eric, we may be sitting here after an NFL slate, because we'll still be doing the podcast, right? We'll still be making money, talking about counter strategies to the strategies that everyone knows, which are these I'm going to correlate.
Exactly.
We're going to be talking about how about I play the most uncorrelated lineup, because it's going to be, no one's going to play 3 wide receivers without a quarterback, so I'm going to play the 3 cheap wide receivers. But honestly, that's Showdown.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that next level, that actually is, because people are complaining over one of the winning lineups was like, no cup, no Woods, left 13,000 on the table or whatever. Oh, you just got lucky. It's like, no, that's Showdown strategy.
Yeah.
Like you haven't got to that point where everything flipped. Like, the thing that makes absolutely no sense? Those are the best lineups.
Exactly. So, yeah, this is good. I'm excited. It gets me excited. You go through frustration periods, everybody tilts, right? And my tilt was over pretty quick on Sunday, so that's good. It was over. It was curtains real fast when you play Bills Jets. But yeah, we get to this point in the week, and you see a little bit of things, and you always learn, and you learn a little bit, and get some other things to kind of consider going into the week, and then you can just do it all over again for 17 weeks, and all you got to do, you only got to win once or twice, and and it works. So yeah, this is good. It helps me. We're all human. You get down in a bog, and it helps me to just talk through things. Keep on the steady path and not get too bogged down with the day-to-day grind of DFS.
Right. We both took L's.
Yeah.
We both took a reverse L. We really took reverse L's.
Yeah. God, there were no W's to be taken on Sunday for me. That is a fact. It was a lot. It was a lot of L taking, but
that's why you play.
That's just how it goes.
You play cash games. You win money on those. Yeah, look at the difference, Eric. Last week we're on the show. I'm like, I just binked $50,000. I got crushed in cash games, right? Crushed more than I think any week in NFL I've ever had. This week, GPPs crushed. Cash games, probably the best cash game week I've ever had, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not making as much money when I'm doing the cash games, but at least to me, that's why I play cash. I don't play cash necessarily because I think that I'm going to make a ton of money and then I'm going to get into $10,000 head-to-heads because I just don't think the edge is there, even at the lower rake. I'm doing it for this very reason of like this is what's like smoothing out the swings of GPP play. Yeah. If I could grind out a 5 to 10% ROI in cash games, like it doesn't make it that I'm going upswing, downswing. Even though I don't max enter, I mean I still enter enough that my swings could be at least for my personal risk tolerance high. That I'm not trying to convince you to play cash games. I'm just like you don't have there's nothing that's going to make you put together a cash lineup, right?
I play some cash here and there, but
really?
I used to play a lot of cash, and I just don't really play that much anymore. For a number of reasons, mostly because I hate it and I don't enjoy it, and I play this for fun. We play it to win money first and foremost, but it's also fun. I enjoy it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it.
Money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun to win. That's what's the fun. If this was a free, people ask me if this was a free game, I'd have no interest in it whatsoever.
No.
So it has to be about the money.
Exactly.
But people, give us your feedback on whether or not did we really take L's? We kind of took L's, right? We didn't take.
If I didn't make it clear, I want it to be clear. I got a ton of L's to take, and I'm willing to take them. You can blast me on Twitter, DM me. Send in emails to the account and tell me that I'm an idiot for some of the things that I do. I'm more than happy to do it. I lose and I'm wrong all the time, but the goal of this is to be a long-term winner, not a winner every week.
Yeah, but I think my L was worse. Truthfully, I think my L was worse. Because if I thought that Lockett and if they were going to be not Metcalf, if they were going to be that low. I X'd them out of my fucking player pool. I mean, like I played 155 lineups and I had nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, that's the bigger L. But the whole thing about the reverse L is that's why it was such like what we were arguing with on Twitter was like you were right and made the wrong choice, and I was wrong. I was right and we both were right and made the wrong choice in the contest that we were in. So that's why it's and you were essentially arguing my point, and I was arguing your point. So I think we invented a new term, the reverse L. So if you're out there, feel free to take reverse L's all you want.
I've taken so many regular L's already this year. We had to come up with a new one for me to try.
Because it's very hard to take a reverse L when you're arguing for the opposite point, in which is what you did, right? It's like, well, I don't think the blah blah blah, and I didn't do it. So like, what? So you were wrong either in your assessment or why you didn't react to that assessment. So like, is that an L really? To me, I consider it a reverse L.
Yeah.
What is a reverse L? Is really just a J. We took a J.
Yeah, J. Yeah.
Kind of like more like a typewriter J.
Yeah.
Okay, so theoryofdfs.com. That's where you can get the course. Send in your questions at theoryofdfs.com. You can follow me on Twitter, BlenderHD. Eric is at Erik Beimfohr, right? I always forget if it's Eric or E Beimfohr. It's Erik Beimfohr with a K and an E before. It's an E before I. You'll find him. It's in the description. You could find everything. And we have week 8 coming up, and there's who knows how many reverse L's we're going to take on the next edition of the Theory of DFS podcast.